I'm John Harris, and I'm the chair of the National Civil Rights Committee of ADL. This year's Never Is Now CLE Track is named in memory of Edward Brodsky, a beloved ADL supporter and champion of civil rights. I am delighted to share a few words with you about Ed and his unwavering support of ADL's mission. Ed Brodsky was a distinguished and dynamic litigator. A graduate of NYU Law School, early in his career, he worked for the Department of Justice in Washington, and then as an assistant United States attorney for the Southern District of New York. In 1992, after serving for many years as a named partner at the Spengler Carlson law firm, he joined Proskauer, and while he was there, served as president of the American College of Trial Lawyers in 1997 and 1998. Ed's strong belief in the law as a vehicle for civil rights, social justice, and peaceful conflict resolution led him to be one of the founders of ADL's Lawyers Division in New York. It was in that context that I first met Ed. He was part of a generation of great defense lawyers that enabled ADL to spread deep roots in the legal community and inspired me and many others to embrace ADL's mission. Like all of those involved with ADL and like all those who knew Ed, I mourned at Ed's passing in 2000 at the age of 70. As a tribute to Ed, his family endowed the Edward Brodsky Legal Conference that, for 20 years, brought together panels of legal scholars to debate the great constitutional law issues of the day. The family also enabled ADL to set up a program for anti-bias training in the New York City Law Department, again in Ed's memory. It was in that connection and in her role as a member of the New York Regional Board of the ADL that I came to know Ed's amazing wife, Cynthia. I want to recognize and thank the Brodsky family for their ongoing partnership, years of generous support, and commitment to advancing ADL's work in fighting anti-Semitism and hatred and ensuring justice and fair treatment for all. ADL is proud to honor Edward Brodsky at this year's Never Is Now Summit. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome back to Never Is Now, ADL's signature summit on anti-Semitism and hate. I'm Lauren Kropf. I'm ADL's National Policy Counsel, and I am pleased to be the moderator for today's session, Double Click on Digital Harassment. I'm thrilled to announce our esteemed panelists who are here with me. First, Tanya Gersh is an anti-Semitism activist and hate crime survivor. In this session, you'll hear more about how the founder of a major neo-Nazi website orchestrated a harassment campaign that terrorized Tanya and her family with anti-Semitic threats and messages for months. The threats took a toll on Tanya and her family, but she fought back, filed a federal lawsuit in court, and won more than $14 million against the neo-Nazi leader. Tanya's courage and strength to not let hate win is a message she has become passionate about sharing. The lawsuit is over, but for Tanya, the work has just begun. We also have with us Nevada State Assemblywoman Rochelle Wynn, who is the first Democratic Asian American and Pacific Islander to serve in the Nevada legislature. During the historic 80th session, she co-founded the first AAPI legislative caucus in the state of Nevada. Assemblywoman Wynn serves on the Judiciary, Health and Human Services, and Growth and Infrastructure committees. When she is not in session, she is a practicing criminal defense attorney. Assemblywoman Wynn earned her law degree from University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and co-founded the Public Interest Law Association there. We also have with us, last but not least, Tara Wadwa, who serves as the policy manager for the U.S. Trust and Safety Team at TikTok, the popular video sharing social networking service. At TikTok, she has worked on global policy development for hate speech and harassment, as well as U.S. policy. Before joining TikTok, Tara spent a decade as a researcher and administrator at the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights. Tara holds a Master's of Public Administration from NYU's Wagner School of Public Service and a BA from Yale University. If you were all here in person, I would say let's give a huge round of applause to our amazing panelists, but we're virtual, so I'll just pretend like I can hear it from your homes. This is an incredible panel. If you have questions, please don't forget to use the chat box feature to the right of the video to pose them throughout the panel, so our Q&A moderator can select a few to ask the panelists after the initial discussion is complete. In this jam-packed hour, we'll talk about online harassment on social media, go over a few case studies, and discuss legal protections currently available and unavailable to targets of online hate. So let's dive in. First, a question to all of you. I want to ask, what do you see as your role in fighting online hate and harassment? Why don't we get started with Tara?
Thanks, Lauren, and it's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting us. As you mentioned, in my previous role before TikTok, I was a human rights advocate out of New York University, and in 2019 joined the global policy team with TikTok to focus specifically on hate speech and harassment. So you can say it's personal to me. Not only is it personal to me, though, it's personal to our company. We have a zero tolerance policy for hate speech at TikTok. And it's exactly for the purpose of online safety that our trust and safety team reports directly into our interim head, Vanessa Pappas. Throughout our whole operation, we prioritize safety. And hate speech is one area where we seek to eliminate it from the platform. It's working with folks like you at the ADL, with survivors like Tanya, to hear their stories and make sure that our community is one that continues to inspire creativity and joy and is free from hate and any harassment.
Thanks so much, Tara. Tanya, you want to go ahead?
You know, my role really is to make sure everyone understands that online hate is very, very real. Not only is it very real, but it's very painful. So many people have a misconception that if it came online, it's not anything as bad as if someone were to harass you in person. And that is a huge misconception, because today's online relationships are today's reality. This is the way we communicate. And when it happens online, it can happen boldly, quickly, violently, and with so much terror that it could actually be worse than having somebody say something to you in person. We all tend to believe what it is written, and when many and tons of people write something that hurts you that bad, it can be incredibly life-changing, and it's ruining lives. It came darn well close to ruining mine, and I need to make sure that my case can set precedents that online hate needs to stop. Something needs to be done about it, because it's real and it's affecting even small town girls like me.
Thanks, Tanya. Assemblymember Nguyen, what do you see as your role in fighting online hate and harassment?
You know, in my lay life, in my private world, I am a criminal defense attorney. And so a lot of times what I see is crimes, and they are committed in a very physical way. And you can see that there is, our laws have not caught up with our modernization of technology and communication and everything online. And just piggybacking off of what Tanya said, there are real victims and there are real survivors that are out there from online hate. So so I find my role is closing those loopholes, closing those gaps, working with organizations like and companies like TikTok and other social media platforms, as well as survivors and victims and law enforcement and members in the community on how we can bridge that gap and close those loopholes. So, and I'm honored and humbled to be on this panel with these powerful women, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. Thanks. And I think diving in from, what is our role to, how do we actually dig deeper into the problem? It's important to first have a baseline understanding of where hate and harassment takes place. All too often, people talk about the First Amendment protecting their rights to speak online no matter what it is they say. First of all, I think as a baseline understanding, we know that the First Amendment protects speech and how incredibly important that is, but that it doesn't protect all speech. It doesn't protect direct threats or incitement to imminent violence. It doesn't protect defamation. So we know that the world of speech isn't completely unfettered. But another misconception is also about where this online harassment is taking place. According to ADL's 2020 Online Hate and Harassment Survey, of individuals harassed online, more than 3/4, 77%, reported that at least some of their harassment occurred on Facebook. There were much smaller percentages across the other platforms, but at the same time, it's important to take note that this hate and this harassment quite often happens on social media. So even if the First Amendment protects speech and not all speech, what's important to also further remember is that the First Amendment protects individuals from government censorship. Social media platforms are private companies, so they can choose what remains on their website. And Tara talked about this earlier, about TikTok's particular ways in which that they create safety and trust on their platform. So knowing that, again, we're out of the realm of the First Amendment, a lot of this hate and harassment is happening on social media platforms. Tara, I want to turn to you first and ask, how do platforms create policies to protect users from hate and harassment?
Thanks, Lauren. It's a really important question and one we think about every day. Just to reiterate, there is zero tolerance for hate on TikTok. We recognize that there's a continuous evolution of the groups and terminologies that seek to proliferate hate speech, and we recognize it's our responsibility to make sure that that is no longer on platform. It's a challenge and one that we meet head on. In developing the policies, we both have internal experts that have spent time in academia or at other social platforms that contribute to the writing of all of our policy. We also work with folks like you at the ADL and our own internal content advisory council that gives us a lot of feedback on the typology of content that we see and what we want to take off of platform. So while there's no space for it at all, we're also always looking to improve and progress because there's no finish line for this. We're always going to be working to iterate to make sure we're capturing all of that. So one example that I have for you is the Proud Boys, the United Patriot Front, and a few other groups have come up recently on platform. And as soon as we recognize them, we have both proactive detection methods to take them down, as well as training our teams continuously to be aware of the different hate typologies that are online and that we want to remove.
Thanks, Tara. And Tanya, do you want to hop in there?
I do. It's really important for people to understand. My case, when we filed, it was filed for the invasion of privacy, intention, infliction of emotional distress, and violating the Anti-Intimidation Act of Montana. And of course, England, he said, well, this is all, what I did was all protected by the First Amendment. Well, a magistrate judge and then a federal judge definitely put down their gauntlets and said, this is not protected by the First Amendment. Hate speech is not free speech. Once hate ruins someone else's life, the speech has completely crossed the line. Hate is not free speech. And also, I want to point out that a lot of people in my experience, they said, Tanya, why didn't you just turn off Facebook? Why didn't you just turn off Twitter? Why didn't you just turn off your social media accounts? And then you could protect yourself from it and never have to see it. I did that for a little while, but hate does not stop at these apps that you can choose to be a part of. Think about the amount of hate that came to me through public websites like Realtor.com and Yelp, anywhere that they could leave a bad review and their hate against me and my family, they did this. And these weren't places that I could shut off. These were things that I was forced to have to deal with and have to see. And so it's very, very important to recognize that social media is not the only place where this is happening. And once you're on a website like that, once bad reviews are left about you online, it is darn right impossible to ever get the life back that you once had, especially any kind of professional life, because if you Google my name at any time, I'm no longer the Tanya Gersh soccer mom with a very private life. I am now a whole different person, and that was not by choice. They took everything that I was and I had worked for all my life and took it away from me, instantaneous by their hate. And I had the ability to take down my Facebook. I had the ability to take down my other social media accounts, but I shouldn't have had to. So there's some things we can control and some things we can't.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. And I think that does sort of come back to the idea that this happens all across the internet, online, in every forum. And it also moves on the ground. That continuum is very real. But there is one complexity circling back to the social media landscape that I do want to touch on. And I'm curious, specifically from Tara and Assemblymember Wynn, your thoughts on, there's a lot of questions about political leaders using platforms and sometimes crossing that line into harassment, and the balance between giving political leaders a platform to engage with their supporters and also at the same time protecting individuals from harassment and not using that role as an excuse to allow for platform violative content that, if it was said by somebody who wasn't somebody with such a big following, how that might be responded to. So from the social media side, Tara, and then as a political leader yourself, Assemblymember Wynn, sort of taking in the public figure standpoint, I'd love to hear from both of you about that.
It's a great question. TikTok is not the place for political content. We're here as the last sunny corner of the internet to inspire creativity and joy. And for users to feel comfortable doing so, they have to be free from fear of hate or harassment, no matter where it's coming from. So our community guidelines point to our hate speech policy, which we use across all platforms, regardless of whose account it is. And if you're a repeat offender, we will remove you from the platform for those repeat offenses. In instances where there's incitement to violence, we also work with local law enforcement when necessary to make sure that those online harms that are so real in the mental space don't also translate to offline harms that could actually impact someone's physical safety. So I see it as something, regardless of who's giving the speech, it's the speech itself that is violative, and so that has no place on TikTok, and we will make sure to always take that down.
I completely agree with you. I think sometimes the social media space has become a thing where political leaders have like extra special protections. and they shouldn't. And in fact, we should expect more from our elected officials to to expound hate, especially in a social media setting where it increases exponentially. I think of it as like a petri dish, just like the hate produces more hate, and it happens so quickly, and you see the real life implications of that. Tanya is a living human person that saw how quickly that expanded, and to all areas of the internet, not just Facebook, not just Twitter, not just Instagram, but Yelp and LinkedIn and other review things. It's devastating, and we should take more of a responsibility. I know that I do, and I know a lot of my colleagues also have that same responsibility. I'm a mother also to 2 young kids that are now doing their all online virtual learning. And even then, it's as simple as like the conversations that take place in their chat box. It is a lot easier, and we have these conversations on a daily basis. And I know that teachers are struggling with that same kind of conversation about what you put in the comments section or what you put in the things have real implications. And like Tanya had said, it can be more devastating when it's in writing because it's there forever. You can Google it, you can look it up, you can go back to it, you can review that comment, that negative comment over and over and over again. And it can easily escalate to physical violence that seems justified in the eye of the person reading it over and over and over again. So I think we do have a responsibility as elected officials to use social media responsibly. And we should be held to the same standards as other people in terms of, hate and inciting violence.
Thanks so much. So we've talked a little bit about the ways in which the platforms create policies and guidelines. And I want to switch to legal frameworks and government regulation for a little bit and hone in on, Tanya, your case. Before doing that, I sort of want to set the stage in that we've talked about online speech, and we know that even as awful as hate speech is, it is protected by the First Amendment. We know that platforms have the ability to create their own guidelines and should be doing so. But when it comes to actual cases related to online conduct, I think that's something that's missing. Tanya, you sued for, among other things, IIED and Montana's Anti-Intimidation Act. But what you weren't able to sue for were things like doxing, which is putting somebody's personal information online with the intent that a crime be committed against them using that information. And we know that happened to you, and I'll ask you to get into that in a little bit. Another form of online abuse that is not speech, that also currently doesn't have enough legal protections, are swatting, which is when somebody calls in a false emergency to someone else's home in order to draw a SWAT team there, unbeknownst to the person. And what that does is creates an emergency response. It creates a lot of commotion and violence, and has even resulted in fatalities. I think doxing and swatting, we'll get into some pieces later, like Zoom bombing and deep fakes and other areas where we're really looking at how the law comes into play with online harassment. But Tanya, I know that you experienced doxing. I know you told me, I believe your in-laws were swatted. And yet the legal claims that you had were intentional infliction of emotional distress, which is IIED, and Montana's Anti-Intimidation Act. So can you talk us through a little bit about what happened to you so that people sort of understand this movement from speech to real crime online, and then a little bit about your case and how it was filed?
Sure. I was targeted because I had a real estate transaction with the mother of Sherry Spencer, the mother of Richard Spencer, who was the leader of the alt-right. When he found out that I was Jewish, he decided to accuse me of extortion and went public with a Medium article, and that caught the attention of Andrew England with the Daily Stormer website. And the Daily Stormer, they have a long history of attacking Jewish politicians and reporters, and the difference between First Amendment rights and what happened to me as far as, which was essentially online terrorism, is that he could have thrown a hate party. You know, he could have said, I hate Jews, here's an example. I hate Jews, and let's throw a hate Jew party. He didn't do that. What he did was say, I'm sickened by Tanya's Jewish agenda, which there was no Jewish agenda, as you can read the story and find out more, just Google me. But he said on his website, tell her you are sickened by her Jewish agenda and take action against her family. Get her in person if you can. Call her, harass her, call her day and night, and let her know what a dirty, whore, Jew manipulator she is. Get her alone. Have her try to sell you real estate. And the messages were, wow, Tanya, you're super easy to find online and in person. They put pictures of me and my 12-year-old son all over online. Spears through my head and said, we want to bring you to the brink of suicide. We can bury you like the rest of your people should have died in the Holocaust without having to touch you. This is not free speech. They are allowed to hate Jews. That's fine. They can hate Jews all they want. They cannot take their hate of Jews and target me specifically, intimidate me to the point where I did have that feeling at some points of absolute pain and destruction and wondering why I didn't die with the rest of my people in the Holocaust. And it made me doubt whether I should be Jewish, and it made me doubt if there is a Jewish agenda. It was incredibly painful and incredibly inappropriate. My innocence was, and my sense of safety was completely raped from me. I see the world in a completely different way than I once did. I also had a 12-year-old son who was in the process of studying for his bar mitzvah, and I had to explain to him, honey, yes, you have to still study for your bar mitzvah. Oh, and yes, by the way, we are being terrorized because we're Jewish. I'm not sure if we're going to have to run and take cover. But yeah, it's still important to study. And oh, by the way, yeah, Jews, we've been hated for millions of years or thousands of years, and but it's still important to be Jewish. You know, like you go through all of these horrible things when you're terrorized to this degree. This was not your normal. I didn't get teased because I had a big nose. You know, this goes so far beyond basic hate and basic free speech of what you're allowed to say about Jewish people. So yes, we SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center, approached us very early on in the troll storm and asked if we would be willing to be their plaintiff. SPLC had followed Andrew England and the Daily Stormer for quite some time and said, Tanya, with you, we could take him down. And it's because I was I was not a public figure. Here I am, a soccer mom from Montana. I'm a private citizen, and they put my 12-year-old son on this website, and we decided, yes, this is a chance to take action and to set precedent so that what happened to me is wrong, rather than just having to be a victim. And when I found out we could possibly stop this from happening to other people, it was like, sign me up. So we filed the case, like I mentioned. It was in Montana U.S. District Court. for invasion of privacy, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violating the Montana Anti-Intimidation Act. Doxing was not a word at the time that was really, like, we couldn't file for doxing because doxing wasn't really something that was truly invented. I mean, I could be wrong, correct me please, but it wasn't something that was really on people's radar. So we took what doxing was and what happened, and figured that those were the three claims that those were the three claims. And of course, his orchestration, the orchestration of this terror campaign was not protected by the First Amendment. That was made very clear in federal court. The judge ruled, a federal judge ruled to adopt the magistrate judge's recommendation on that, and then awarded us the $14 million. It was $4 million in compensatory damages and $10 million in punitive damages. It was the absolute max amount that the judge could rule in this case. So I think he was definitely trying to make to send a very loud message to haters that this is something in this day and age is absolutely not acceptable. We haven't seen that money, by the way. I don't think that it's something that we will be able to collect. People always ask me that, but we knew that that was not, that wasn't in the cards from the beginning. It wasn't about that.
Absolutely. And I think you brought up a lot of really, really good points about the way in which you had to use the law to fit into what happened to you, as opposed to the law being there for you based on the fact pattern that existed. And that really does highlight, you know, the fact that our laws are out of date. Doxing, you know, I love the way you asked that. You know, correct me if I'm wrong, doxing wasn't invented at the time. And the reality is, individuals who are putting your information online and who are directing others to engage in criminal conduct towards you and in stalking towards you and in harassment towards you, that is doxing. What's not invented, or really what we should say is codified, is those laws on the books at the state or federal level. And that it's stories like yours and understanding that we really are moving past speech at this point into conduct that motivated ADL to launch our Backspace Hate campaign, which is a state and federal campaign to close those gaps and loopholes, to create protections for victims and targets. And, you know, that turns me to Assemblymember Wynn. We're working with lawmakers across the country to make sure that those laws are strengthened. So from your perspective, what can lawmakers do to protect victims and targets when really things are quite behind right now?
I think it's our responsibility as lawmakers to reach out to organizations like ADL, reach out to, you know, survivors like Tanya, to hear their stories. She is the most powerful voice, you know, as an example. And I'm so grateful that she is using her voice to protect other people in the community, because if it could happen to her, it can happen to any one of us. If it could threaten her and her children, it could threaten any one of our children's or family members. So I think it's important. It is something that you also see now, not just in this arena, but with people making false claims, like calling the police out, like there's a black man, like, you know, going to assault me, that's bird watching in, like, you know, a community park. So you have other things. And I know that in the legislation that we're working on here in the state of Nevada, and I know other states are also working on this, is we're meeting with law enforcement, we are meeting with community organizations, we are meeting with people to see how best we can combat this and how we can capture this horrible criminal behavior. One of the things that I think sometimes people forget is, you know, there's someone, you know, when the police are called out in a swatting type situation. They may have just gone to a house, but now that there is a heightened sense, it puts these officers in a heightened sense of like, concern for their safety, for the safety of the people that are in the building. They think people are armed, they have weapons, they have guns. And so they are approaching that scenario under those circumstances. And it could be everything from now all of a sudden we're activating lights and sirens. We are going through like an intersection, creating like another enhancement to community safety. So it could be everything from the traveling from wherever they are to wherever the scene is, to how they arrive at the scene, to the people that are unsuspecting that are living in that like area have SWAT all of a sudden in their like building. So I think it's really important to realize that this affects everyone in the community at a lot of different levels. So there's a lot of partnerships and collaboration that we can do to kind of move forward. I think it is always the problem, unfortunately, with our laws and our statutes and codifying things. It tends to move a little bit slow. I know in the state of Nevada, we only meet every other year. So, we have very limited opportunity during that 4 months. We meet every other year to enact laws that are keeping up with our modern technology. But I think it is important that we continually see this as a dynamic change. Our laws are meant to change and adjust and accommodate that. So I think that's good. But I think also, you can't legislate the elimination of hate. And I appreciate organizations and companies like TikTok. I know that they also see their role in a proactive sense, where they want to encourage people, but sometimes we have a lot of young people that are on like platforms like TikTok. And I think they also have an opportunity, and I know that they can probably expand on this, but I know that they use that opportunity to, how can we best educate? How can we redirect this hate and re-educate someone to realize how hurtful or hateful this is? So we're catching people when they're young. I have young kids and they like to get on TikTok, and, it's always difficult because I can't sit there physically all the time behind their back watching every single video and explaining comments on everything. So I think that there is a responsibility on the part of these organizations and companies that have these platforms to be, progressive and proactive about how they are going to deal with that as well. So
thank you so much.
The time in which we do it is so important too. We can't wait to do this, because what's happening online on places like TikTok is that hate is starting to become normal. It's starting to become a normal part of the experience that kids sadly are starting to experience. And since they're experiencing it, they might start to feel like it's okay for them to do it, where we need to be very loud and very vocal very quickly that this has to stop, and it has to stop soon, before it just becomes like a normal part of being online, as if it's no big deal.
That absolutely. And I think that actually turns us really naturally to one question that I imagine some folks might have, and also really going full circle in the fact that the laws can and should and must be created to protect individuals, but that's not where it stops, or really even where it should start. And we'll get back to those standards. We are getting CLE credit here, so I promise I'll give you that information. At the same time, it is talking to young people. It's creating those environments on social media platforms. It's educating individuals about what is and isn't appropriate, so that there really is an environment to be able to model decency and that type of behavior online, whether or not it's legally technically protected. So with that, Tara, I do want to ask you a two-part question. From a really technical standpoint, what does it actually entail to remove content? I know, to moderate content. I know that you mentioned that TikTok has a zero tolerance policy. How do we enforce that? And then the other piece, and going back to what Assemblymember Wynn mentioned, which is what are you all doing in order to maybe nudge users in the right direction, or help them to better understand, especially your younger users, the impact of their words?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with the conversation that regardless of what the statutes are, we know what the right thing to do is, and the right thing to do is to eliminate hate on our platform. We acknowledge that it's a huge challenge and one faced by all companies and places on the internet, and that will continue to meet. In terms of our policy, though, we say we have a zero tolerance policy, which we enforce regularly, and no policy is complete if it doesn't have the enforcement backing it. So there are a range of different ways that we attack this. We both look at how we can detect hateful content online, whether it's through certain hashtags that are proliferating. And if there's a hashtag proliferating, such as Heil Hitler, not only do we block results and block the hashtag, we also give a nudge to the users that instead of seeing results, what they see is our community guidelines saying this is hateful behavior and it violates our community guidelines. Please go learn more about them and why it's not okay on platform. We also look at different groups that are being promoted online. So groups like the Proud Boys or groups like other right-wing militia groups online leading to incitement. We designate those groups as hate groups, and we don't allow for them to be proliferated on platform. So that's working with, on my team, we have a whole dedicated team to trainers. Those trainers work hand in hand with moderators on the ground to show them case examples, symbols, cartoons that are offensive, that really proliferate these stereotypes that are so harmful to all of us. And it's in those ways that we're able to make sure that we're having the most reach and coverage that we can to mitigate this problem. To your second question around how we educate younger users. So while we get off those that have shown repeatedly that they're here to proliferate hate, we also want to work with our younger users and those that are just exploring their expression and identity to help them understand why this is so harmful. So one of the campaigns we did was to speak to users in their own language. We created TikTok campaigns and videos that go into the user feed that speak to our values around creating an inclusive community where we celebrate everyone's differences, where survivors can share their stories and find a tight-knit community there to support them the whole way through. And that's something I'm really passionate about doing ever since being at NYU as an educator, being hands-on with the community, building that strong fabric of support is so important to me and to TikTok to continue to provide.
Thank you. And I really do hope that we get to a place where social media platforms across the board are taking seriously both the enforcement and also the protection and community creation and the eye on really providing services and resources to victims and targets, because we know that as much as we do, we also want a place where people can express themselves. And we also want to, be able to have an environment that if something does happen that, might come up to the line and might not be enforceable for some reason or another, still individuals have the environment to be able to, like you said, Tara, find community, get resources and all the rest. And I think that we're really operating on an interesting continuum. We're talking about what's going on the platforms, what may or may not be protected. And we're also talking about sort of the technicalities of some of these laws that should exist that either don't, or laws that are out of date. So I know that there have been questions about, swatting specifically and doxing, because that's what we've been talking about here. And how doxing differs from other types of speech and how swatting differs. And so just to sort of dig into that a little more before we resume some of our other questions, with doxing, even though there is a speech element to it, that extra level of intent that should be and is required is one where we believe that, again, we're going from protected speech to something that would be out of the bounds of the First Amendment. So there aren't a ton of doxing laws across the board, as Tanya, you mentioned, and as Assemblymember Wynn, I know that we both know well. A couple of states, California, for example, have weaved in doxing behaviors into their cyber harassment statutes. Some other states have broader language that we aren't sure at ADL if it would be necessarily pass constitutional muster. So our theory, and we're working on model language that really can be used across the board, is to make sure that there's a strong intent standard for all you lawyers out there, so that when somebody posts information, it's with the intent to promote or assist in the commission of an offense. So that's an extra level. It's really making sure that the intent there is that some crime be committed against the individual who's on the targeting end, just like what happened with you, Tanya, that there was this really clear line to use this information in order to target an individual. This isn't just speech, that's really targeting. On the other side with swatting, and something that we've looked at in ADL's analysis regarding online hate and crimes and harassment and the continuum that exists in that space, is conduct versus speech. You know, when somebody is calling or drawing a SWAT team or even a false emergency that's not necessarily SWAT related to another location, that's conduct that's resulting in it. And so if there's a reckless disregard that conduct will result, that SWAT will result in some sort of injury, then again, it really does leap outside the bounds of what should and shouldn't be protected. With doxing, we really, in our analysis, weren't finding enough protections across the board, even in cyber harassment. With swatting, you know, there are false emergency statutes. And I know, Assemblymember Wynn, you can attest to this too. A lot of them were really parallel to calling in a prank call, or, you know, individuals just sort of pranking the 911 emergency line or the police, which is, again, of course, completely unacceptable, but really different than these swatting emergency responses. So I don't know if Assemblymember Wynn, you want to talk about sort of the differences there and why we think that the law isn't good enough, but I might turn to you just to sort of to respond or react to what I mentioned.
You know, I think when you look at swatting laws in particular, a lot of jurisdictions, they treat it as a misdemeanor, like a false reporting of a police, like a false call to 911. A misdemeanor, like, for example, in our state, jaywalking is a misdemeanor. So it carries with it the same penalty as staying outside of the sidewalk or the crosswalk as it does, you know, filing this false police report or swatting. We did enhance the penalties here, but even then it's very difficult because, you know, unfortunately you have like a distinction between, you know, there's a lot of swatting calls that take place between online gamers. And then there's a distinction between those teenagers that are calling the police, also dangerous, but also people that are, you know, calling it based on race or religion or any of the other protected things, you know, protected groups. So I think making that distinction, kind of looking at it like holistically, talking to those groups, it does make it a little bit more difficult to come up with a law that's equitable and fair and accomplishes what you hope to accomplish in eliminating hate speech and violence. So those are some of the things that we've looked into. The one thing that I've noticed is because we live in such like a global community, because you know, you can sit from your house in Florida and, you know, verbally and attack someone online in Montana, you know, there really has to have this we have to have this conversation on a national level as well. You know, we can go through and fight it state by state by state, and I think that's also important, but I think a national level, it's something that we have to have a serious conversation about, just because of the global nature of how, you know, both of these crimes occur. And it's just too easy. It's too easy to wreak havoc and terror on someone in another state from thousands of miles away. So I think it's important to have those conversations, not only with our local state leaders, but also with our federal delegates, in order to have like that continuity.
So well said. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Really quick to get in there though, just because I don't want to forget for our CLE folks out there, something in your materials should be the Online Safety Modernization Act. This was introduced in the 115th Congress, not passed, and that would codify doxing and swatting at the federal level. You're exactly right. We need protection state by state and at the federal level. But Tanya, please continue.
Yes, keep in mind the old-fashioned cross burning on lawns. Used to be 60 or 70 people that could get together and cause unheard of pain to a family. With online hate, those numbers are crazy big. There were 400,000 followers that Andrew England told to take action on my family. These hate groups are organized and they are motivated to hate. They take a lot of, they think it's fun, and they're huge in numbers. This really is what's setting apart online hate from hate of the past. The incredible power of numbers that are organized right now to dox people is absolutely frightening. Think about that. That's 400,000 people that were asked to terrorize my family. So it really shows, and it's the same thing with followers on Twitter or followers on Facebook or followers on TikTok. These are huge numbers, and not big, and there's a huge power in numbers to do some real damage.
And I think all of you have brought up something that I want to draw upon and magnify a little bit, which is why ultimately online hate and harassment is an ADL issue. You know, we've put a lot into better understanding the online hate ecosystem. And the reason we've done it is because the impact on marginalized communities is far and away beyond any other impact. So, you know, ADL's recent online hate and harassment data shows that over a third of individuals who are harassed online say it's related to their identity. Tanya, I know that is exactly, of course, what happened to you. Assemblymember Nguyen, I know you talked about the protected characteristics that we need to make sure are just that, protected, both for on the ground and online crimes. And that's what makes it an ADL issue, is that this is about hate, and this is about somebody or a community being able to operate in online spaces and not be harassed, stalked, or terrorized because of who they are, what they look like, who they love, how they pray. And I think those are some of the real key takeaways, at least for us, on why we need to continue focusing in this space, because it is absolutely the new frontier, unfortunately, for hate and harassment. I'm going to turn to Q&A unless anybody had any responses to that. I have some questions queued up here for all of you.
One thing just to add is, one thing I just wanted to add is there's the Justice Brandeis quote that more speech can eliminate bad speech. And I think we're seeing, to Tanya's point, the scale of speech online and how we need to go beyond just trying to create more speech to combat it. Instead, we need to really look hard at what we need to take off platform that just doesn't belong in the public dialogue, and be sure that we're removing those actors from even having the opportunity or voice to commit these attacks on protected groups that you so mentioned. But I want to reiterate that I'm so lucky to be here with you all, because I recognize it's not just something that TikTok can do or the companies can do, but it's going to take partnerships between government, between organizations like the ADL, and with survivors like Tanya, that we can always remember these are the stories that we're fighting for.
Absolutely. We have an interesting question regarding education, and I'll first direct it to Assemblymember Nguyen and then anybody who wants to respond. But should we be talking about requiring K-12 teachers to teach about online hate and the harms and the responses in our schools? So first to you, Assemblymember Nguyen.
I mean, I think it's definitely something that we should look into. I know a lot of schools do it. I know a lot of teachers do it. I know a lot of districts already have incorporated that. My younger sister is an elementary school vice principal up in Washington State. So I know that it is a very much a part of like the conversations that they have with their teachers there. You know, our teachers are just some of the most incredible people ever. They're angels as far as I'm concerned. They are teaching our kids. And in this global health pandemic, with everything being online, I think they are being thrown into just unimaginable circumstance to teach our kids. So I think there should be some level of, like, I guess, you know, we have financial literacy, internet literacy, those kind of things. And I think they are incorporated into a lot of curriculum, and I think it should be. But on the flip side, I think there are other more creative ways, and there are other people, including in our homes, in our communities, in our churches, in our temples, in our synagogues. We should be having these same kind of conversations there with our kids, as well as far as educating them about internet security and internet responsibility, and just our responsibility as human beings.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I have a question, Tara, about the global nature of all of this. What are the international differences? You don't have to get into the legalese too deeply, but we know that the First Amendment certainly doesn't exist outside of the United States. So how does TikTok operate your trust and safety policies and your enforcement from a global perspective?
Of course. Our community guidelines serve as our North Star, and those are global in nature. So they're not tailored to the US or to any one market, but instead govern how the whole platform approaches our articulation of our principles. And safety is our number one priority. So all the policy that you see laid out in our community guidelines, whether it's around hate speech or dangerous organizations, minor safety, those are globally applicable across the world and anywhere that we operate, because those are the fundamental values of our company.
Thank you. Now, this question from the audience is to Tanya, and I think I might know the answer to this, but I want to, of course, ask you, did the hate and harassment stop after the lawsuit?
It didn't, no. It definitely slowed down. But I still to this day receive messages of hate online, not nearly to the degree that I used to. But once your name is out there, it's hard to ever go become private again. I think that I'll probably be somewhat of a target forever, especially if I keep speaking. Anytime that there's any kind of media or event that I am participating in that has media, I tend to get a little bit of harassment. For the most part, though, the second that Andrew Anglin told his followers to stop because we filed the lawsuit, the big bulk of it pretty much slowed down overnight, which is really interesting about how these hate groups have a particularly eerie amount of control over their followers. With doxing laws is really, really important to understand how gullible and how crazy followers of these kind of hate groups actually are, that they'll actually listen to these nutty followers. But no, to this day, I get harassment, and now I just make it motivate me instead of hurt me.
Thank you. That's incredibly inspiring. I know we're nearing the end of our hour here. We still have a little more time because we started just a little bit late. So I wanted to ask one final question and then go over a couple of logistics for the audience here today. Logistic-wise, we'll have one more question. We'll put up our CLE code and end with a video that really leans into and better depicts, it's a 1-minute video that ADL put out, the difference between online speech and that might be protected, albeit awful, and the crimes that are happening online. And I'll explain that a little bit more, but just sort of wanted to tell you where the rest of our short time together will go. So the final question for you all would be, what's next? Just briefly, what are you all looking to do in your fight against online hate and harassment? I'll start with Assemblymember Nguyen.
I have been working during this interim period. We go into our next legislative session in February of 2021. And so I do have a bill that I'm seeking to introduce that will specifically address and enhance and kind of close any of those loopholes in this area of swatting and hate crimes. So I'm proud to be able to, continue that work. And I do see this as an ongoing an ongoing project. Our laws need to keep up with things that are happening in our communities, happening on our online communities. And so, you know, I may be back here in 2 more years, like trying to fix things and make them more effective. And hopefully, you know, in combination with working in these collaborative kind of settings where we're having these kind of conversations, we'll find other creative ways. I always think of the Southern Poverty Law, you know, as they're very creative lawyers. You know, in the 70s, I'm half Vietnamese, and my dad, they took on a case regarding discrimination and hate with Vietnamese fishermen. And so I know that they are very creative, and I think working with the ADL, working with those lawyers that fight these civil rights violations and these hate crimes, and working with companies and organizations that have platforms that
I'll just pop in really quick before we go to Tanya and Tara and talk about, you know, what ADL is looking towards, which is, you know, understanding the new forms of harassment that are surfacing. For example, Zoom bombing. As we've moved into this virtual first world in light of COVID, we're seeing individuals come into video teleconferencing rooms saying incredibly discriminatory and bigoted things, interrupting individuals during worship or during educational activities. And these federally protected activities or protected activities in some other manner are being thwarted. And so what we're trying to understand here is, you know, what are the bounds? How can we protect people from Zoom bombing from a legal standpoint, from a policy standpoint? We've worked with Zoom and other video teleconferencing platforms to make sure that their safety features from a product and policy standpoint are there. But how can the law protect people and community members, and how can we create shared definitions and a better understanding of online harassment in all of its forms so that we can understand that this is not right, it's not allowed, and, you know, we can educate people about the real pervasive impact of this type of harassment. So moving on to Tanya or Tara, you know, what's next for you in this fight?
I've been working on an educational documentary that hopefully will reach America and teach them that it's time to take note that any kind of behavior where you harm someone else is just not okay. It's time to bring a little political correctness and just love and respect for other people back into mainstream society. And my the documentary will tell the story of what happened to me and hopefully make it teach a lesson that, look, it's time to be nice. It's time to normalize just taking care of one another, because being terrorized, being bullied hurts. It hurts a lot. And you don't think about it much until it happens to you. And it will end up happening to you if we continue down the path we are in this country. So it's been an honor to be part of it. And also I'm looking forward to working with the ADL more on being part of their mission on bringing this to light and doing something about it legally. There's a lot of brains need to go into this fight, but a lot of heart needs to go into this fight too. And I'm kind of all heart, and hopefully my story will reach a lot of people, and just I'm with a sense of pleading to please everyone. It's time to just start being nice. Keep it to yourself.
Thank you. Tara?
Tanya, yours is a story we keep with us to remind us why we do the work we do. I think there are two things looking forward that we'll continue to hone in on. The first is how do we improve our detection methods, our technology, and the other resources we have to surface and eliminate hate from the platform. It's an ongoing challenge and one without a finish line that we're committed to seeing through. The second part is what we spoke about a little bit earlier. How do we educate users on the harms of their speech whether it's hate speech or harassment or bullying? How do we have them create empathy around the experience of the person on the other end and help them to create a community that's positive, that gears them towards celebrating our differences and coming together as a group that is diverse and has a lot of value to provide to one another, instead of continuing to put up these walls between the different areas of our society.
Thank you all so much. I'm incredibly inspired. For those of you that want to dig deeper into the legal definitions and what we're really looking at here from that standpoint, please refer to the materials that you were given when you signed up for this. We can certainly geek out about that at any time. I'm here for that. Before we let you go, I want to first say thank you to our amazing panelists.